Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. This is State Senator Mallory McMorrow. Thank you for joining us for another This Week with Mallory. And this week, we're very honored to have a special guest who is able to join us. Dr. Fred Korematsu is the founder and executive director of the Fred T. Korematsu Institute and the daughter of late civil rights icon Fred Korematsu. I will let her tell her father's story, but as we are coming up on Fred Korematsu Day in just a couple of days here, we were really thrilled that Dr. Korematsu is able to take some time for us. So I will go ahead and bring her on so we can get right into it. Dr. Korematsu, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. A pleasure to be with you, and thank you, Senator McMorrow, for inviting me to be with you and talk to you about my favorite subject, my father, Fred Korematsu. Yesterday, actually, I met with several of your colleagues up in Lansing.
That's
Uh,
wonderful.
at the Capitol, a few senators and House of Representatives, and talking about my father and the proposed legislative bill to establish Fred Korematsu Day of civil liberties in the Constitution, hopefully in perpetuity for the state of Michigan. And
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that work. And we're really pleased that we could kind of extend who you're able to speak to everybody who can tune in to our live stream. So for those who may not know, can you share a little bit about your father's story?
Yes, well, actually, my father is considered a famous civil rights icon for this country, stemming from, I mean, he didn't set out to be that way, believe you me. He was born in California a long time ago in 1919, but he grew up like any other American kid in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he was third son of four boys, so he was always kind of odd man out if you have a bigger family and you know the
Yeah.
dynamics. And he attended school and there and hung out with his buddies. My grandparents came over from Japan at late or early 1900s, as we do in this country. When we want cheap labor, we go to other countries and recruit them and say, come to America, land of opportunity, and by the way, we'll pay you cheap wages and kind of treat you as a marginalized person. And they were basically agricultural areas of Japan, because they went to the West Coast and helped really cultivate a lot of agricultural there. We're very successful. And it's kind of the same story of with the Chinese and the Chinese railroad, and even Latinx. You're taking away our jobs. Go back to where you came from. But my father learned about the Constitution in high school. So when I'm speaking to high school students, I say, well, pay attention, because you never know when you may need to really call upon your rights as an American citizen. And so after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, of course, we know that uh, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, and basically that was to forcibly remove anyone of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast. 120,000 people, two-thirds were American citizens. And it didn't matter if you were a baby or the infirmed. You had to be, stripped from your warm house and wherever you lived. You could only carry with you what you could hold in two hands, basically. Try to sell 5 cents on the dollar if you were lucky, because you only had a few days warning.
Hmm.
And you didn't know where you were going. You didn't know what kind of weather. So it could be hotter than Hades or freezing cold. If you're in the desert, it's both. And there's no air conditioning and there's no central heating. So what do you take? And then you'll see, I want to add though, you'll see photographs of people all dressed up in their Sunday best.
Mm.
hats and just all their Sunday best clothes because they were too bulky to pack them. But they were very proud people.
Yeah.
And that's to go to church and dress up, I mean, not so much these days, but back in those days and when I was growing up, I mean, you didn't go to church in jeans. Oh no, forget that. You're a band or your mother would even let you out of the house,
Yeah.
back in. But so with the executive order, my father couldn't believe as an American citizen, right? He's an American citizen,
Yeah.
and all due process of law was denied. So you didn't have any charges against you. There was no access to an attorney. There was no day in court. You just looked like the enemy. That was it. That was the only reason. And my father thought that was wrong, and so he didn't report to the detention assembly center, which was really a horse stall,
Oh.
horse racetrack, most of them on the West Coast. I mean, all they did was whitewash them, and they still smelled like manure, and you had a iron cot and an army blanket and food that you could hardly eat. And you had to live that way for 3 or 4 months before you were sent off to one of the 10 permanent, so to speak, incarceration camps across this country, as far as even Arkansas.
Mm.
And my father's family went up to Topaz, Utah, but all the conditions were the same, out in the middle of nowhere. Many of them were on indigenous tribal land. So I noticed here in Michigan, you have all
Yeah.
these kind
Yeah.
of Indian names, right? But even back then in Arizona, which now Governor Ducey just signed the legislative bill that establishes Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and Constitution in perpetuity for the state of Arizona. And two of the incarceration camps were built there. And I asked one of the tribal leaders, well, did the government ask? And he said yes. And I said, well, but they were still built. He said, that's right. So the government ignored them.
Mm.
That's kind of typical. So my father, after he was arrested, was sent to federal jail and had a bail hearing. And Mr. Bessick from the Northern California affiliate of the ACLU read about my father in the newspaper and visited him in jail and asked him if he would be willing to be a test case because he thought it was unconstitutional. And he said, if need be, we'll go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
Now, my father believed in the Constitution, he believed in this country, and he believed in the Supreme Court. And that's that says a lot for a
Absolutely.
young person. I mean, he was 23 years old at the time, so he'd been through school and working, and so he just couldn't believe it. Uh, and so after his bail hearing, he was sent to San Francisco Presidio. So if you've been out to San Francisco, it's a National Park Service site now, but it was home of the Fourth Army,
Mm.
where there was 100 exclusion orders issued from there that incarcerated all of these Japanese Americans. And that's where my office is now, ironically.
Oh, wow.
Father was in prison there,
Yeah.
shortly. That we still don't know which stockade he was in. We're still there. It's some deep in Army records, and of course, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we're still looking. But even when he arrived from the Presidio to this Tanforan racetrack, home of Seabiscuit, if you know about horse racing,
Yep.
people that are watching, that his own Japanese American community shunned him. They ostracized him and vilified him for taking a stand. But they didn't even want him to continue on fighting his case, but he did so very quietly. His family didn't support him either, and he wanted alone. And so by the time the case, through the appeals process, reached the Supreme Court on December 18th, 1944, the decision was still against him, but it was a 6-3 decision and not unanimous. So the three dissenting opinions. I mean, Justice Roberts referred to my father's case as "this lies around like a loaded weapon, ready for
Mm.
anyone to pick up and use in plausible cause. And after 9/11, my father's case was cited as a possible reason to
Wow.
round up Arab and Muslim Americans and put them in American concentration camps. Justice Owen Roberts said it was unconstitutional, and Justice Murphy, who also has a home in Michigan, called it the ugly abyss of racism.
Mm.
That's quite a statement, talking about that time. So those three dissenting opinions, resonate today. But my father never gave up hope that someday he would be able to reopen up his case, and through evidence that was found in 1982, they did so in '83, because at the time of my father's Supreme Court case, the Department of Justice had lied to the Supreme Court, withheld evidence, and altered evidence. So who knows what the outcome would have been if they truly had all the information, not the misinformation, which we seem to be dealing a lot with these days.
Right. Right.
Uh, so after his um, uh, conviction was vacated, he crisscrossed this country and kept speaking as I do now. But the interesting thing, I have a connection to Michigan. So towards the end of the war, the government knew that the Japanese Americans weren't dangerous, and so
Yeah.
they said, "Well, what are we going to do with 120,000 people all at once if we end war and they can go home, whatever that was." So they had community leaders go in to these various camps, and my father's youngest brother was already in Detroit, Michigan. So
Wonderful.
my father thought when he would stop and visit him, he thought he'd go on to New York. And I have to tell you that you may not know this as part of your own history, that Michigan and the Midwest were very welcoming to the Japanese American people. That not the South, you couldn't go west, but the Midwest and Michigan. And Detroit, was like a city of 100 churches or more so, and one on every single corner, not a Starbucks or a McDonald's.
Right.
And the building is still there, and it's called Woodward Avenue Presbyterian Church.
Oh yeah.
Woodward Avenue, it's still there. It was a Presbyterian church, then it went on to another denomination. Now I think it's listed as a historical site. A tech company, I think, is trying to renovate it. I would love to take it, and I talked to the tech company to see if we can also make it a boys and girls center,
Oh
something
wow.
for the
Yeah.
youth in that area, and to help to give back to the community. But the church, my mother was born in South Carolina. She was Caucasian, and she received a scholarship to attend Wayne State University to work on her master's in microbiology, and she did. And then also worked at Ford Hospital, because I know everybody must know Ford Hospital, and worked on research for penicillin. I mean, obviously, this is a long
Wow.
time ago.
Yeah.
And she graduated in 46, and then taught nurses, Mount Carmel nurses, and they spent some time there. And so my mother attended Woodward Avenue Presbyterian Church, and as all the churches did at that time, they created these youth groups and invited everyone in. And my mother met her first Japanese American person, like, ever. And yeah, and Elma and Takahashi, and they met one Sunday, and then Elma came back the following Sunday, and they became fast friends. And actually, Elma is the one that introduced my father to my mother. They went on this date. Back in those days, you could drive around if you had a car, and on a Sunday afternoon. And then my parents were married in Woodward Avenue Presbyterian Church. I want to put up a
Oh my
plaque.
gosh. I didn't know that.
Yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
I mean, I have skin in the game here. It's
Yeah.
a big connection,
Wow.
and very proud of it. So because it was a very fun time for them, but because Michigan and the people of Detroit and surrounding, I said to my mother, "Do you ever face any kind of discrimination and remarks or anything because you were together and then you got married and you had to find a place to live?" And she said, "No." I mean, they experienced more discrimination in California when they went back than they did here,
Wow.
which was, truly amazing for the time, and says a lot. And now I work. We work in education, but I work with all 50 states, including your Department of Education, especially in social studies. Work with your supervisor of social studies, and part of that National Council for the Social Studies, to get curriculum available in the schools. So we have curriculum on our website, korematsuinstitute.org, K through 12. Even parents can have access to it, because beginning of the pandemic, everyone was going, help, help.
Right.
Parents were just like, we need help.
Right.
So I said, hey, we'll just open it up, and just register, and that's it. And we've got a short video on our website, about 24 minutes. It's 24 minutes of a 60-minute documentary of civil wrongs and rights, the Fred Korematsu story, that received two Emmys.
Wow.
So it's a two-time Emmy Award film from 2002, that we now have a grant to extend it, to bring in the relevancy of what's been happening today. And so, you were talking about, yes, the anti-Asian violence and hate that's been happening in this country. Unfortunately, just the it's the negative and the hateful rhetoric and the actions, right? And I think, my point that I try to emphasize, no matter who I'm speaking to, is prejudice is ignorance, and our most powerful tool we have is education.
Yes.
So Fred Korematsu Day is about education. It's about learning about his fight for justice. Of course, history is present now. History is not just in the past; it's present. And if we don't know our history, then we can't deal with these issues. And I think that's been some of the problem. And it's about upholding our civil liberties and the Constitution. Even when you were sworn in, you had to take an oath to uphold our Constitution and defend it, as everyone does in this country, whether in the military or elected officials. So it's about our Constitution. It's not political. It's not Democrat or Republican or independent or anything like that. It's about all of us, and we need to remember that. And it's about civic education, because we want people to be, if to make a difference, to give back, and to be civically participate.
Absolutely.
Not only voting, but also community, right? Whether it's city council,
Yep.
school boards, playgrounds, PTA, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, any of the service organizations. That's civic participation. And that's what my father and my parents actually demonstrated, because they were in Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. My father was in the International Lions Club. Um, they president twice of his local chapter. So this is, participated in our church. So this is, we need the diversity in this country. We have MLK Junior Day. In some states, we have um, Cesar Chavez, Rosa
Mhm.
Parks. Actually, I've done several years ago, and I did an event at Wayne State University with the Rosa Parks Institute.
Oh, wow.
So we partnered together. So this is about showing the diversity and inclusion in our country, and to appreciate each other, and to show respect for
Absolutely.
each other's differences,
Well,
and
I
not to
love that you shared your connections here, because I think that is one of the most underappreciated things about Metro Detroit. When I talk to people from all over the country, is how diverse we are, and so many different backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, great food, by the way. When
yes,
you've got a
yes.
diverse population, you've got great food pretty much on every corner. But I want to ask you, because I think there's always this perception that things like internment camps, can never happen here. When they did happen here, and not that long ago, and you were only one generation removed from it. So I wanted to ask you, growing up, what did that feel like, knowing your father's story, and how much, obviously he was still going through the court cases, and we didn't get kind of even a fair resolution until the 80s, but how much did he tell you about that experience, and what did it feel to you, knowing that, not that long ago, we had internment camps in this country for Japanese Americans.
Well, he told me 0. So actually, I was 16 years old in high school, in my social studies and U.S. history class. Our teacher had assigned different paperback books for students to read, and my friend Maya, her book was called Concentration Camps USA. Interesting title.
Yeah.
And she gets up in front of the class and tells about the Japanese American, internment is the word they use. I say incarceration.
Yeah.
We're trying to elevate the euphemisms. And she's telling us about this time in history, and I'm going, oh, I've never heard about that before. And I'm 16. And then she says, but there's this one man that disobeyed the military orders, and it ended up to be a landmark Supreme Court case called Korematsu versus the United States.
You're like, wait a second.
Oh, that's my name. And I have 35 pairs of eyes looking at me, and I'm shrugging my shoulders thinking it's some black sheep of the family. Now, mind you, the only thing I knew was Korematsu is a very unusual Japanese name.
Yeah.
And there was only 6 Asian Americans in my entire high school of 2,500. So we kind of stuck out like sore thumbs, right? And or we were just kind of put aside. And so after class, I asked my friend Maya, "What's this about?" And she said, "Well, this is about your dad." I said, "No way! Somebody would have told me."
Wow.
And I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Well, we've been friends since we were 5 years old. And she says, "Well, I thought you knew." So this is kind of like, well, no, we did not have that kind of dinner talk.
Right.
It just didn't happen. And that's what happens in families, especially now since everyone's so busy. But so I go home and confront my mother, and she says, "Well, yes, you have to wait until your father gets home and ask him." And not only did he have housing discrimination, he had employment discrimination and worked 2 jobs. So it was 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And I told him and calmed down a little bit. And he said, "Well, it happened a long time ago. And what he did, he thought was right. And the government was wrong." That clear and simple. And I couldn't ask him any more questions. It's like somebody gave me a sucker punch in my stomach, because I could see this hurt going over his face.
Yeah.
Except the one thing I did ask was, "Well, can you vote?" Because voting was very important to my parents. They studied the ballot, they knew the issues. We would hear all this. They might say something to us and discuss what was going on, especially if there was a school board type of issue. And he said yes. I mean, in California, if you had served your sentence, which his was probation, you could vote. And each state has their own policies and laws. So and then we didn't speak about it again because it was just too painful. I think both for my father and myself. And this is a long time ago. This is
Right.
this is not, this is 1967. So there is no such thing as Law and Order on television. I didn't know much
Yeah.
about the law, and we didn't talk about it again until my father said he was willing to reopen up his case in 1983. And until that time, I didn't know he had never given up hope.
Wow.
Think about it.
That's
Almost
amazing.
40 years, and he never gave up hope. And he was never bitter or angry. Some people that when I was up at the Capitol yesterday that knew my father said he was very humble,
Yeah.
kind. He treated everyone like he wanted to be treated. It wasn't perfect. I got scolded too. But he was that kind of generous person that believed in our humanity, believed in supporting each other, and it is truly amazing that he never blamed anyone. He didn't blame the government. He didn't blame the general. He didn't
Wow.
blame anybody. It was the government was wrong,
Yeah.
and he was right to take a stand. Sometimes we make issues so complicated we can't see the forest through the
When
trees.
they're very, it's straightforward. It's simple. You've got rights in this
Yeah.
country. His were violated. So that brings up, it's amazing to me that you learned about this from a classmate and in a book in school. And I have to ask, with the news this week, we learned of a school board in Tennessee unanimously banning Mouse, a graphic novel about the author's father's own Holocaust survival story. And, there is this trend happening that's very worrying of not recognizing, history is violent, and there are, people are capable of really bad, ugly things. And I think your father's story and your family's story shows the importance of knowing and learning and acknowledging, so that we don't do the same things. People like me, elected officials, all of us in communities, don't do the same thing that previous governments did in our own country. So I
Right.
just want to get your reaction to news like that, and kind of this trend that we're seeing of attempts to soften what's taught in school because it might be too challenging.
I was totally disheartened and just sad that I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're taking so many steps backwards. I mean, I know that, it's always a fight, where, we try to make 3 steps forward and it's 2 steps back. I mean, this is kind of still the tug of war that we have in this country, especially now, unfortunately, with with such a big divide.
Right.
Um, but and that's, acknowledged. But it truly, I guess I would want to speak to the school board members and say, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Why did you want to ban a book that is about history? Yes, our history, the world history is not pretty sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's good. Sometimes there is some positive change that comes from it. So that's how we should look at history, and that's the way it should be presented to students. Is yes, there have been mistakes made in the past. Yes, there was horrific treatment and of people, and that's the Holocaust is the inhumanity. In fact, when I first started speaking, when I founded the institute in 2009, and that's when I started speaking more
Yeah.
publicly, right? Not until that time. So that wasn't, only what, 11 years ago. And uh, I would say Japanese American concentration camps. And I even had a childhood friend said, "Oh, you can't use concentration camps. You can't use
Mm.
that term." And I said, "Well, President Roosevelt even referred to the camps as concentration camps, and one of the Supreme Court justices." I said, "You need to look up the definition, because
Yeah.
yes, it's associated with the Holocaust, and many of those were death camps and war camps. But
Right.
we did have American concentration camps, and that's nothing to be afraid of. And we need to know the history, to know the facts,
Yeah.
not to distort the facts. And I'm sad that people feel like children aren't able to cope with any type of bad behavior or even violent behavior. Yes, we want to protect our children, but at the same time, we want them to be realistic about life now, because they see it on television anyway. So
Right.
what's the difference between seeing someone killed with a gun and all these television shows where people are killed with guns, and the Holocaust? To me, it's all that's there. There is no difference,
It's violence. Yeah.
except it's violence is violence. You're right, but the thing is that children, they're like sponges. And even someone said, when I was asked to speak, my favorite audience actually is 5-year-olds and first graders.
I
And
love
when
that.
I was asked to speak years ago, at the very beginning, to this kindergartner and first grade class, I go, I can't do that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just no way. And so the another teacher said, well, just talk in terms of what's fair and not fair. For all those parents out
Yep.
there, you probably get that, right? That's not fair, but
Yep.
we kind of have to move it along. And also, when I spoke to them, I didn't try to make it, just very scary, but I had this 5-year-old raise his hand. And he said, so, Miss, what you're saying is that if this happened today, we would have to go to a prison camp. We don't know when we're coming back. We can't take with us what we want, and we haven't done anything wrong. Is that correct? And I said, yes. I
Wow.
had 100 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds go, oh.
Oh,
Now, and we had a discussion afterwards, and I said, okay, I want to ask you, how does this make you feel? And they said, worried, but they said, but we have hope because Mr. Korematsu had hope,
oh,
and he kept fighting for us. So it's the way that you present this information, right? So you have a book, but you just don't give a book to a child and say, just read this.
right.
You have to prep. A good teacher will prep the student for what they are reading and give them background information. I work with teachers all over this country. And for a school board to ban a book is clearly sending the wrong message
Yeah.
and not helping to learn about the diversity and inclusion of and equity, and also the inhumanity
Right.
that has been part of world history.
Right. Well, that was my question, was what's going to give you hope? But I think you answered it. I think 5 and 6-year-olds and the way that they process information. My daughter is turning 1 tomorrow, so I hope that
Oh, well,
she's a sponge and
happy
she's
birthday.
thank you. So you've been so generous with your time. So I just want to leave you with the last statement. Anything you want to leave people with? What should they know about Fred Korematsu Day and the Institute? All you.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you for giving me this time. Go to the korematsuinstitute.org, Korematsu. You just have to know how to spell institute.
And we'll put the link in the chat for everybody, so they'll have a link
Okay,
to click on.
and then you can, see our educational materials. We're having also, you can sign up and for free of charge. We're having our special virtual, of course, Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and the Constitution. We're talking about get vaccinated. I know that's been a big issue for everyone, but believe you me, it's to get boosted, to get flu shots. The same outrage happened when I was 5 years old and polio.
Mm,
And everyone was said, "Oh, great, we've got a vaccination." Then we got, "No, can't give it to our kids." But the little boy across the street ended up to be in braces, the
mm,
rest of leg braces the rest of his life
oh,
because they didn't have the vaccination in time for him.
yeah,
So I realize everybody's got their health issues, but if health wise, it's safe for even women that are pregnant. One of my former staff members has had no problems. She got pregnant, has had a baby just this month.
oh,
Very healthy
congratulations.
boy. So it's it is safe. Just know the facts. Don't
Yep.
listen to the misinformation. And and I'm hoping and encouraging the state of Michigan, the way that Florida established Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and the Constitution was because 7th graders wrote letters to
Oh,
to their
wow.
state senator who created the bill. Remember the cartoon,
Oh,
How
yeah.
to Create a Bill?
Yep.
And then it passed and went to the House, and that's how that day was established for Florida. So I'm hoping Michigan
It's
will
wonderful.
do the same because it's about education. And my father said stand up for what is right. When you see something wrong, don't be afraid to speak up. Thank you.
Dr. Karen Korematsu, thank you so much for joining
My
us
pleasure.
today and for sharing your father's story and so much good insights. It was really, really wonderful to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. Stay safe, everyone. And come.
Oh my goodness. Well, that was just an absolutely wonderful way for us to start our Friday and start our This Week with Mallory this week. So we are going to pivot into discussing updates from the Capitol this week. We had the annual State of the State address was this past Wednesday. It was virtual again, unfortunately, 2 years of a virtual State of the State due to COVID-19, but want to share a lot of, frankly, the good news. I know that especially when we are so divided and it feels like all of the news out there is just, I don't know about all of you, but I am just constantly sort of tired. It can be hard to realize that there is a lot of good news. So there was a lot of good news to share in the State of the State. And I want to run some of that down with you that we've accomplished over the past year. So starting with jobs in the economy, the state has a $3.5 billion surplus, which when we started the pandemic, we were looking at a huge deficit, as I think everybody around the country was, with people staying at home, not going to work, all of the unknowns about the virus. So the fact that we have a $3.5 billion surplus is great news. It means people are getting back to work, people are out in their communities, supporting small businesses, supporting restaurants, and that is phenomenal. Michigan turned our projected $3 billion deficit into a $3.5 billion surplus. So we even made up that potential deficit and then some. And we have the third highest GDP in the United States. So we are doing really, really well here in Michigan. We added 145,000 jobs here in Michigan, including 67,000 in the last 3 months. And this is really important. I know, right now I represent probably one of the most purple districts in the state. So, we've got a lot of people who consider themselves kind of socially liberal, fiscally conservative. So one good thing, and I'm really, really proud of this in our state budget, is we added $500 million into Michigan's rainy day fund, which is the right thing to do. We've got a surplus. We're not blowing through everything at once. We're saving some of that money so that when there is inevitably another downturn, which we all know there will be at some point, we are ready to withstand that. So that's great. Update on COVID-19. Of those who are eligible to be vaccinated, those 16 and up, adults. So we're talking adults here. 70% of Michiganders are vaccinated. When you look at overall population, we're somewhere around 56%. So we're doing good, but we can keep going, keep making progress. We are seeing really phenomenal numbers. We had Dr. Sims from Beaumont Health on with us last week to talk about really the effectiveness, particularly with the Omicron variant, of boosters. We are seeing that those who've been boosted are really withstanding Omicron, this latest wave of COVID, much, much better than those who aren't, which is great news. So if you haven't gotten vaccinated, get vaccinated. And if you haven't gotten your booster, and this is anybody who's eligible, go ahead and get it. The numbers are just really great. And I was in Beaumont this week. I was actually out of session this week, unfortunately, because I had surgery on Monday. But I'm doing well, obviously, recovered enough to be doing this live stream. But it was really great talking to Beaumont staff and nurses who said, yes, they're seeing a lot of numbers with Omicron, but that this does feel quite a bit different than previous waves that they've seen, where they are seeing significantly fewer people end up in dire situations. So that's good. And that's a testament to people getting vaccinated, being safe. And hopefully, Omicron is a sign of things to come where, if COVID-19 ends up becoming endemic, that it is manageable for all of us, which will be great. All right, jumping to infrastructure. In 3 years, Michigan has invested $4.75 billion to repair, replace, and rehabilitate. This is a huge number, 13,198 lane miles of road. That's a lot of driving. There have been 903 bridges that have been fixed, which is fantastic. So Fix the Damn Roads was what the governor ran on, and we're making huge progress there. Jumping into education, there was a $17 billion K-12 spending bill, which finally, for the first time in Michigan history, closed the funding gap between districts. So now it doesn't matter what zip code you're in, that baseline per pupil funding is now finally the same across the board, which is fantastic. And there are 170,000 above tuition-free opportunities on a tuition-free path to higher education and skills training through the Reconnect and Futures for Frontliners program. I've been talking to people a lot about this week on how we can take these programs and what we've learned and expand them, make sure everybody, my goal, is that every child born in Michigan has a pathway to a tuition-free post-secondary degree, certificate, training program, higher education, whatever. That is what I am working on, and I'm really, really excited to see the success of these programs. Jumping into gains for families. The governor last year signed the largest investment for childcare in state history, $1.4 billion in childcare funding to expand access to childcare. 150,000 more children are eligible for subsidized childcare. And there was also additional funding for childcare providers and bonuses to keep more people employed in that line of work and get more people into that line of work, which was fantastic. From childcare to, or starting the other side of the screen, childcare to seniors. So for seniors, Michigan became the first age-friendly state in the Midwest to ensure Michigan prepares for dramatic and imminent demographic changes. Michigan, and you've heard me talk about this a lot, Michigan is one of the oldest states in the country. We have a large population of people who are heading towards retirement. And if that is you, we want to make sure that you have the resources that you need to have a great retirement. You've deserved it, age in place. And the governor also proposed the elimination of the pension tax to provide an $800 tax break to over 400,000 seniors. This is something I heard from a lot of you when I was knocking doors running for office for the first time in 2018. For those who are asking, why hasn't this happened sooner? The governor has proposed this since 2019 in the budget. It hasn't moved through the legislature. I hope that we get it done this year. I've heard some people ask, why just the pension tax? Why not overhaul our entire tax policy? And that's a great question. I think starting with the pension tax is an important first step, because when the pension tax was implemented during the Snyder administration, it really hit a huge subset of the population who had planned for a certain amount of money in retirement, and then that plan was gutted. So, if you're already retired and you planned for a certain amount of money in retirement and you don't have new income coming in, that's a huge hit. And that I think that's unfair. We need to fix it. But moving forward, I would love to see a more robust overhaul of our tax structure to really take the weight of the tax burden off of low and middle income families and make sure that it's more fairly distributed. I have supported ideas for a graduated income tax in the past. Probably not going to happen with this legislature, but future plans moving forward, I think starting with the pension tax is the right thing to do. Then we've got to really look at how do we overhaul tax policy to be fair for everybody and to ensure that we have enough revenue to invest in the things that we need to invest in the state. And then lastly, on LGBTQ plus rights, the governor signed an executive directive to do something that we've been pushing since day one with legislation that I have had to prohibit conversion therapy, so-called conversion therapy, which is really not therapy. I've heard it called conversion abuse by members of the LGBTQ community, and I think that is much more accurate, which is a practice of trying to forcibly change somebody who identifies as LGBTQ into somebody who is straight. There is no scientific basis behind it. It's incredibly damaging. So the governor took a step to sign an executive directive that eliminates the use of any state dollars to any counselor organization who uses this practice, which is a wonderful first step. Now we've got to pass our bill to get it done, sign it into law, put it into statute. And then there were 5 proposals in the state of the state that I want to run down. We talked about the retirement tax. That was proposal number 1. Proposal number 2 was raising the earned income tax credit to give over 730,000 working families an average combined federal and state tax refund of $3,000. I think that is a great, talking about tax fairness would be a great step. Proposal 3, mental health access. We know that this has been a huge issue, especially throughout the pandemic. Expanding access to mental health and behavioral health by retaining or recruiting hundreds of mental health workers. And this is what we're seeing in, frankly, a lot of areas that we need people, right? Teachers, healthcare workers, mental health workers, childcare workers. It is that attraction and retention piece that is going to be critical, because we need more providers to ensure that we can provide the access that people need. So more to come there. Proposal number 4, insulin costs for those who rely on insulin. The Attorney General just announced a lawsuit against Eli Lilly looking into price gouging for insulin. And the governor wants to ensure that we are capping insulin costs at $50 a month instead of up to $100 a month to really bring those costs down for those who rely on insulin to exist every day. Frankly, cost of prescription drugs. We know that that is always a serious issue. And then proposal 5, something that I am very excited about, electric vehicle credits. The governor proposed a $2,000 rebate for the purchase of an EV, which would be on top of the $7,500 federal credit, in addition to also including a $500 rebate for an at-home charger. I am somebody, I drive a Bolt myself, so getting that charger put in at home. I've talked to a lot of colleagues really trying to wrap their heads around, if it takes 5-10 minutes for me to fill up my car with gas right now, how are we going to see people who are going to wait, 20, 30, 40, a few hours at a charger? But really, that's the wrong question, because I can tell you very honestly, with a charger at home, I rarely, if ever, stop anymore. It's more of getting in the mindset of the way that we treat our cell phones, where when you're not using it, you charge it. So I get home, I charge it, I leave for work in the morning, I come back. So that credit for an at-home charger with the rebate is a great plan that will get a lot more EVs that are built and made right here in Michigan on the road, and to cut down on the carbon that we put into the environment. All good things, and it is where our industry is going, and that is great. There was a lot of me talking. All right, I am lastly going to jump into our good news for the week. Let me share my slideshow. There we go. But bam, technology. All right, first up in good news this week, the Royal Oak Leprechauns baseball team are hosting a winter festival. If you don't know who the Royal Oak Leprechauns are, this is a MLB-affiliated collegiate team who plays right here in Royal Oak at 13 Mile, right around Memorial Park. And obviously, we're not playing baseball in winter, so they are hosting a winter festival. It is February 5th at 6 p.m. It's free. That's the best part about it. Something to do in the winter that is free. There's going to be hot drinks, warm snacks, family fun, vendors, ticketing, merchandise, and they're also using the speed gun that they usually use to see how fast they're throwing a baseball. You can see how fast you can throw a snowball. So, get competitive, get out there. That'll be a lot of fun. We will share links for that. So get out there, Winterfest, February 5th, totally free, Memorial Park. All right, next thing on our good news. This is really good news, especially as we hear the sometimes really spicy, hot rhetoric come out of Lansing about schools being open. We know that the best thing for our kids is to be in schools and in school safely, especially after, oh my goodness, the entire pandemic of virtual learning, being back in school safely. So really, really exciting news out of our schools in Oakland County. There were zero new COVID-19 school outbreaks reported in Oakland County. And that was fantastic. So we know how to stay safe. This is, again, a great reminder. Everybody who can get vaccinated, go ahead, get vaccinated, get your booster, mask up in public spaces. We know what to do to stay safe and stay back out in our lives these days. And great news from Oakland schools. Last but certainly not least on our good news this week, this young student, very excited, Aditya Yogesh, who's a 5th grader from Troy's Barnard Elementary School, is the grand prize winner of the 2022 Kids Clean Water Calendar Contest, which was run by the Oakland County Water Resources Commission office. The calendar contest is open to local 4th and 5th grade students, and the calendars are available for free at various Oakland County libraries while supplies last. Yogesh's artwork, which is titled Save Today to Survive Tomorrow, is featured on the cover of the 2022 Kids Clean Water Calendar. And there were over 600 art submissions from kids, 12 finalists, 36 semifinalists, and Yogesh got his artwork on the calendar, and it looks like a super cool water bottle. That's amazing. And he is the first student in the contest's history to win the calendar contest grand prize 2 years in a row. So he is a force of nature. Congratulations. And I'm going to go see if I can pick up a calendar. So with that, I am going to turn off my screen sharing. I'm going to bring on the voice of Liz this week because we're having some technical difficulties and could not get her camera working, but we've got a beautiful picture of her. So the voice of Liz is here to facilitate any questions. So you heard a lot of talking from me and Dr. Korematsu this week. So this is time for our live Q&A. So how this works. We live stream this on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. This is your opportunity to ask anything you want to ask, but the only thing that we ask is that you type your name if that is not immediately obvious by your username. This is especially true for Twitter and YouTube. What city you live in, we want to make sure we are prioritizing constituent questions, and then go ahead and fire away with your questions. So Liz, do we have any questions this week?
We do, yeah. Sadly, I've been subject to the rudeness of technology, but I took a selfie and I added myself in there, so it's like I'm there.
I was going to say, I think that's what I saw you in earlier today, so that's a today picture.
Yep, it is like a 15 minutes ago picture. We have one question from Kathleen who wrote into our district inbox from Birmingham. Wanted to know about our OMA bill, the Open Meetings Act bill, and wants to know more about it and know if it has support or movement.
Fantastic. All right. So quick overview on the Open Meetings Act. OMA is the law here in the state that requires that all boards, commissions, public bodies have to meet physically in person, post their meetings within a certain time window so that the public is aware, so that the public can come and participate in these meetings. Now, that has been a challenge with COVID-19 and the pandemic. So you may remember at the start of the pandemic, all of the local county boards, commissions, city councils, city commissions were meeting virtually, but those bills to allow for that expired. So I have introduced a bill that would extend the ability for local municipalities to decide for themselves whether or not they want to meet virtually through the end of 2023. Our understanding, Kathleen, is unfortunately the Republican majority is not interested in extending that bill at this time. We have heard some concerns from the majority about, potentially leading to people not showing up for meetings or being out of state, all of which I believe and know can be solved by just setting strict guidelines for how to participate in meetings virtually. I know when I log on to some of the state work groups that I participate in, I have to report where I'm calling in from. So, I log on and I say it's Senator McMorrow, Royal Oak, Michigan. So I can't be, somewhere out of the country logging in. So that bill has been introduced, no movement so far. There are also a few other bills that are pending. I know Senator McCann, one of my colleagues, has a bill that would allow members of boards or commissions to be able to participate in meetings virtually for any medical reason. That also hasn't been taken up yet. So far, no movement. We have been having meetings. We regularly have quarterly meetings with all of our local mayors and city managers, as well as first responders, police, fire, etc. We've asked all of our municipalities to send in letters of support for this legislation. And frankly, if you know people in other municipalities, counties, areas of the state, because we know that locals want this. And frankly, having virtual meetings gives a greater element of participation, frankly, for the general public, where, if you're not going to go sit in a city council meeting on Monday night for 3 hours, you can log in, which is great if you have a job or kids, or, you just can't get over and commit that amount of time. So it's something that I support. If you are somebody who supports this, we would ask that you send in letters or emails to committee chairs to take up the legislation, and we're happy to share that information with you if that is something that you are interested in. But that is OMA 101.
All right, that's the only question I see.
All right. Well, thank you, Liz. I'm going to let you go. Your selfie go.
Goodbye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This was just a really, like I said, just an honor to have Dr. Korematsu to talk about a really important part of our history, and one that really didn't happen that long ago. A reminder of us that we have to learn all of history and be honest with it. But I really loved how hopeful she was. And I think we can all learn something from, hearing that her father didn't hold a grudge. This would be something that would be easy to carry a lot of anger around with you. And he didn't. So I think that is something that I'm going to hopefully carry with us. We will be sharing this out for people to watch. I know we had some notes from some teachers who said they wish they could log in with their students and watch this discussion with Dr. Korematsu. So we'll be sure to clip that and send it out if you're interested. But thank you for joining us. We hope you have a very safe weekend, and we'll see you next time.